So basically, I was just going to talk a little bit about our model, but in the context of, I was kind of asked to speak about a kind of food web rather than a food chain, and why we do. I suppose we talk about it quite a lot as a sort of ecosystem of organisations. Like Claire said, I've been, because I'm involved in the Kindling Trust and one of the co-founders of the Kindling Trust and Kindling Farm. And then we, as part of what we do, set up Manchester Veg People and Veg Box People as well. And then various other practical projects kind of related to food and farming. And basically the reason that we did, the reason that we do what we do, sometimes people, Chris, who's the other co-founder, always says that he thinks sometimes it can look like a bit of a dog's dinner, our kind of crazy model of what we're doing, but I think it's very well organised and a strong, resilient, diverse model. But basically, sorry, still not moving on. I don't know how to. Sorry about this, everyone.
Do you want me to try mine? I don't know whether it'll make any difference. Do you want me to try mine?
Oh no, here we go. I'm just going to do it now. So yeah, so where we kind of came from was looking at the mainstream food system and just saying it doesn't work in terms of like the huge ecological destruction that it's causing, but also the kind of social injustice in terms of the, you know, growers, farmers not really being able to make a viable livelihood often, and other people in the like kind of retail side of things often being on 0-hour contracts, and then other people not being able to access good food, and the kind of rise of food banks, and just kind of looking at that and being like, this is totally mad, but also completely unnecessary. We've somehow slipped into this destructive model, but we could swap it for a different one and a fairer one and a more sustainable one. And we absolutely believe, well, we have to do that, but we also believe it's completely possible and better. And the way that we look at it is that you can't do that by tweaking one bit at a certain point in the food supply chain, that you have to do all of that, because actually if you look at how do you support growers to work in a better way, or to farm more ecologically, but you haven't sorted out the market end of things, then you're training people up to go into a career that can't make them a living. Whereas if you grow the market side of things, then and there's no growers there, then what are they going to do? They get interested and there's no produce. So we kind of looked at it as like, how do we, it's a bit like squaring a circle or whatever, but how do you kind of do all of that at the same time? And the model that we came up with through talking to actually loads of amazing people all around the country, that kind of, whether they were producers co-ops or growing communities, I think that's probably how I first met you, Claire, as well, was kind of coming and talking to you when we were doing the research about Manchester Veg People, of just how do you increase access to sustainable food in a city in a way that's fair for growers and people eating the food, and the people selling the food as well. And we came up with a multi-stakeholder co-op of growers, buyers, and the workers in the co-op as well. So yeah, so these are some lovely photos of that lot. I'm going to let me just take that. And it's basically, as I say, it's kind of part of this wider system. So we've got, when we first set up Manchester Veg People, one of the first people to come along were the University of Manchester, who wanted to be involved as a buyer, which was amazing. I was very lucky to make that contact. And when we started, we were kind of basically selling them veg for their halls of residence and their on-site catering canteens and stuff. And because people just really loved the food, they kind of started saying, actually, is there a way where we could not just eat it when we're at work, but take it home? So we also set up Veg Box People, and Veg Box People is based on the growing communities model of having collection points, and our first collection point was at Manchester University. So it's kind of, and we also then run, as Kindling Trust, we run Land Army volunteering days. So we take people out to work with the local growers and support the new growers that we're training through the Farm Start programme. And then they get to know the growers and meet the growers. And there's just kind of this really nice way of everyone working together. And kind of that connection also helps grow the market, if you see what I mean. I'll come back to that a little bit more in a minute. So this is just to sort of try and explain a little bit more about the model itself that we developed from kind of talking, and we talked to loads of people where they felt their models hadn't really worked. So a couple of producers co-ops, and they really advised us to get the buyers to be part of it. And we went for, one of the reasons that we went for restaurants and kind of public sector catering was because the model that we had, like in Manchester, small restaurants were finding it really hard to access good local food. So you'd go out to eat in some of the little local restaurants and it would all say sourced locally, food sourced locally, and then you'd ask them where they got it and they would have got it from the wholesale market, and they would really want to buy it from local growers, but they didn't know how to get a hold of it. And then we would talk to the local growers and they would say, yeah, no one approached us to buy local food. And it was like, because there wasn't a connection there. And it was also really tricky for the growers because they were kind of spending like more time than they had trying to find buyers for their food. And actually what we want them to do is focus their time on growing food, beautiful, amazing, tasty food, because that's what they're really good at and that's what they really want to spend their time doing. So the model that we set up was about bringing those two together really, and trying to find a way to sort of take some of the work off the growers, but also the buyers, make it easier to access local growers, and also just to build up this relationship between growers and buyers and to try and get them sort of to just communicate a lot more. And the other reason, sorry, I keep remembering lots of reasons why we set up, but one of the things that happened as well was there's actually not loads of growers, loads of organic growers in the Northwest. And when we started this, there were even fewer in a way. And there was just this one year where some of the growers, because they weren't really talking to each other, they grew the same crop and there just wasn't enough market for it. And so one of the growers had ended up having to plough theirs in, and one of the other growers had to really put the price down. And we just kind of came together and were like, this is totally nuts. Like this, there must be more market than this, and there must be a way of working where this isn't happening to growers. So the model works where we try and get we crop plan, so we coordinate the growing between the growers, but we also work with the buyers to try and our original idea was to try and get them to commit to buying certain crops and a certain amount of crops for the whole year ahead, a bit like a kind of almost like a CSA, but with them really planning their menus. But that just kind of was worked out too difficult to do that for everyone concerned. Really, the growers weren't even particularly into that either, because they were like, oh, it's too scary, too much of a scary commitment if something goes wrong. So what we instead do now is that the growers work together and crop plan, and then we kind of based on either what buyers, the regular buyers that work with us, like the university, what they've taken in the past, or helping them go through what they normally buy and the volumes that they buy, and we try and work out the crop planning for the growers to then say, okay, well, if we plant this much, we know that we'll sell it to those buyers. So it's about trying to make the market as guaranteed as we can. We also support the growers in terms of the pricing. We kind of, because the pricing in the kind of mainstream system is very much decided by the market. So often growers get told what their prices are, like the supermarkets, whatever, what they'll pay. And often it doesn't cover the cost of production. And so what we've tried to do is say, okay, you work out how much it actually costs you to produce this food and base your prices on that. And then we need to, whatever margin we need to charge to make the co-op run, we put on top of that, rather than vice versa, which is often with even some of the really lovely other models, the growers have to pay towards the sort of distribution side of things out of the money they're making, we found. So we just tried to turn that around a bit. it's actually a little bit, we always used to think we would come up with this small formula that everyone could use, that all the growers could use to work out their cost of production. Actually, it's like a massive spreadsheet and a lifetime project that various people have been working on. But it's still a really useful thing to do. It's a really useful exercise. And then basically we do the ordering. So the buyers order through the co-op, and then we kind of order to the growers. So it's kind of about, again, for the University of Manchester, they're quite a large operation. So what they don't want is to be having to deal with lots of different growers to get their different produce and do all the different orders. So it's much easier for them to order through one main point of contact. And then we go out and we talk to all of the growers and do the ordering through them. And similarly for the growers, it's just much easier for them to say, this is what we've got available, and then we kind of sort out the ordering side for them, the buying side. And basically in terms of the logistics, so and this is where some of the challenges are for everyone, I guess, of this model, is that we do 2 orders a week. You have to get as the buyers, you have to get your orders in by a certain time for us to then be able to give enough notice to the growers, because the aim is always to, with the very local growers that you order, they harvest that day, and then it's either in your kitchen later that day or first thing the next morning, sort of thing. And we do that as much as possible. Obviously, especially where we're based in the northwest, we can't all year round supply from local growers. So we have started stocking in sometimes, but again, we try and do that and keep it as fresh as possible, and based on what we know people want, so that we reduce the waste. But yeah, so that's kind of the model, and then we deliver out. We sometimes with the growers will go and collect from them if that's easier for them, if we can, but we try and, again, it's all about sort of reducing those costs of distribution as well, so that we can then get more of the money to the growers, and also keep the costs as the prices as reasonable as possible. And then we, as the co-op, do the marketing, but we say we, but the members, the growers and the buyers are the members of the co-op, and actually the marketing is all about marketing the kind of growers and the chefs and the localness of the produce. So, but we kind of try and have it that the co-op does that work. And then kind of the other activities, I guess, are, so there's a committee, and we try and make the committee representative. So there's always a grower, always a buyer, and always a worker, a co-op worker on the committee. And they kind of make the decisions, because I think as well, originally we'd had sort of visions of, everyone coming together loads and kind of doing lots of stuff in practice and in person, and actually people are really busy, and the growers are really busy in the day and the buyers are really busy in the night. So it's a bit challenging, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but we have managed to do some really lovely things of kind of meetings on the farms and taking people around the farm. So that's a really nice bit of the model as well. So yeah, the benefits, basically one of the biggest benefits is about building relationships along the food supply chain, and just people getting to know each other. So the growers getting to know the buyers and vice versa. And also just getting to know kind of the seasonality and the reality of food, because I suppose with restaurants, people also, and with retail, but we mainly work with restaurants, there's people are really used to just being able to order what they want whenever they want to, and order it kind of the night before at 3 o'clock in the morning, and have it there in the kitchen when they're waiting for them when they get there, and at any time of year. And I suppose this is about sort of saying, well, the growers just can't do that. So if you want it fresh, then we need to do that in advance. And it's just kind of, building those relationships. So this is a picture of the group of chefs from I think it's the chefs, it's from the University of Manchester, coming in doing a kind of a land army volunteering day at Cleveland, one of our local growers. And what was really lovely was that kind of when they come out there, they then kind of wander around and go, oh, it'd be really amazing if you could grow us this yummy new thing that we've heard about. And so it kind of then also sparks ideas and conversations, and just they absolutely loved being out of the kitchen or offices for the day and just being out on the farm. So it's really great. And just other benefits that we've sort of talked about a bit. So one of the things about growing the market for organic food, so when we started, and still now, all of the chefs and all of the restaurants and the university that came on board were new to organic food. So none of them it wasn't like they were already buying organic local food. And then they joined us. It was a new thing. So it is a completely new market that's been created in Manchester. And I think that's, for us, that's probably the biggest thing that we're trying to achieve, really, is to grow that demand so that more people can grow food in that way. It does take work off the growers, so that's great, although there is more work if they're on the committee, because they have to come along to all the meetings. But it's definitely, I think they feel it outweighs those benefits, outweigh that, and it's also that being a farmer can be quite an isolating career, I think. So actually coming along to the meetings can be quite a good thing, a nice thing to do. There's additional support, so we do support new growers through the New Farmers programme, and then the buyers are buying that. The Manchester Veg People buys food that we grow through the New Growers programme, so that's great. And again, they feel part of that sort of movement, so it feels like a much more supported way to grow into growing, I think. That there's more resilience through being part of a network. And sort of sharing the risk. I think quite often in the mainstream system, it can feel like a lot of the risk is on the farmers, which is really hard. Like kind of when we first set up Manchester Veg People, some farmers were a little bit dubious about working with us because they just had been shafted by supermarkets and some of the mainstream buyers, because they said that, they'll just change their minds about what they want, and you've kind of planned, or just say it doesn't look nice enough or whatever. We've all seen those programs now on TV of veg not being accepted and all that waste, but it's just really hard if you're a grower. So I think just kind of this is about sharing that risk through the sort of relationships of understanding. And then the new opportunities, so Veg Box People came out of us doing Manchester Veg People, and and just people get excited about other possibilities. And it's just actually a really good story. It's a really good story for the university. It's a really good story for restaurants, and a great way of marketing what they do, because just lots of pictures of beautiful growers and chefs handing over veg or being handed veg or whatever, and about that you really are actually doing something, you're part of something, of creating change that we need. So there obviously are challenges. It is a really different model to what people are used to. So I was saying about, many chefs are used to ordering the night before, just depending on what is left in their fridge, and that is really tricky, and we are aware of that, and try and support chefs to kind of make those changes. So you do have to do the advanced ordering. There is limited availability. We don't only buy from local growers, because there's just certain times of the year that we just wouldn't be able to supply, and so we do buy from further afield when we need to. But yeah, if you don't get your orders in quickly at the busiest times, then sometimes the produce would have gone. And there's just the cooperative model. People are really not used to working in that way. If you've worked, and I've not either done chefing, but my impression of it is quite a top-down, can be quite a top-down career to be in, and people just aren't used to it. And again, growers and farmers are used to working on their own quite often. So it has been a really interesting journey setting up, and people coming into working in that different way. And then costs, it does cost more. Not because it's more expensive. There's this weird thing of people talk about a premium with organic produce. It's not more expensive, it's just that we need to pay people to cover their costs of production, and the market costs aren't based on reality. They're based on squeezing the growers and people not being able to make a viable living. So I think that's a real thing about perception, but either way, it is a perception that people come to, that come with when they're used to buying from this normal mainstream system. So costs can go up. We have worked with the work that we do with schools as Kindling Trust. We did some work on changing the menus and helping them to get more local organic produce onto their menus. And more vegetables, because they had very few vegetables actually in their menus. So we did do some work around how to change your menus without putting the price of the school dinner up. So it can be done, you just need to do it in a different way. And then the cost of running the co-op, obviously, made me suddenly realise why wholesalers have to put a margin on things, because actually it's quite a lot. It is quite expensive to do distribution and so on. And then, yeah, I've sort of mentioned this already, growing supply and demand at the same time is a challenge. So if you grow the market before you've grown the supply, or vice versa, it's really tricky. So that's been quite a challenge. And then growing year round in the Northwest is also an exciting challenge, but one that we're about to take on. So what makes it work? The people make it work, basically. The chefs absolutely loving the produce, because it is really good produce, and it's lovely, it's totally different, and all of you on this call know this. It's so totally different to eat something when it's fresh out of a field than when it's been sitting in a fridge or on a shelf for ages. So they're passionate about it. Produce, and that's the other. It has been it is a challenging market to work in with restaurants, because things change, and chefs change, and restaurants shut and open, and they're not necessarily great payers and all of that sort of thing. But actually, they're brilliant in that what they love most is food, and that's good food. So so people make it work. Building relationships, I've mentioned already, bringing people out to the fields and to meet the local growers and to get involved in harvesting. We've done some great work. This is another picture of a meeting with when the Manchester University lot came out to meet the growers. And it was just really lovely. It was great. It was really lovely. And we've still got that relationship. We started working with them, as Claire said, 10 or 15 years ago or something, and they're really supportive. We've just had loads of interest in how they want to work with us in terms of Kindling Farm and what more can we do, and kind of as soon as, so this year's been totally bonkers, obviously, for everybody, this last 12 months. And all of the restaurants closed overnight at the start of lockdown. So we've kind of had to just put things on hold with Manchester Veg People. But the university, basically, as soon as they kind of found their feet a bit, got in touch with us. It wasn't us chasing them up, because we kind of knew that everyone was having a really difficult time. And they got in touch and said, oh, we're really worried that we're not buying from you, and can we start buying from you again? And so that just wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had this sort of relationship that we have, and this kind of the different ways of working together. And then being part of a bigger picture, I think we feel is what makes this work. So I think the thing that when people are, for example, looking at something and thinking, oh, flipping heck, I can't get this through them, I can only get, I don't know, kale, I would rather get this, then actually what they think is, oh no, but I remember planting this garlic when I went to that farm for that day, or I've been involved in doing things, or I know the growers, or I also know I'm supporting a wider picture. So one of the things we do as Kindling Trust is run a social prescribing program, and that's about kind of saying, while we absolutely love working with the restaurants, we also know that not everyone can afford to eat out at restaurants, but we think that everybody has the right to eat beautiful, organic, tasty food. So what are the other ways that we can make food more accessible? And so one of the ways we do that is through working with schools, as I mentioned earlier. We'd like to do a lot more of that. But the other way is through a social prescribing programme where we work with people who either self-refer or referred to us through GPs, who come along and learn how to do a bit of gardening with us, learn how to sort of cook, or relearn how to cook, and cook with seasonal local food and then eat a meal together and then take a veg bag home. And I think that, again, that's kind of, it's sort of a separate project, but it's actually all connected, and kind of the people who are part of Manchester Veg People know that what they're doing is also supporting us and is part of creating that wider movement of just changing the food system. And then Veg Box People, again, there's a lot of working together. So originally when Veg Box People started, because we were doing the collection point model, it was great because we could go to restaurants that were already buying from Manchester Veg People and say, would you also like to be a collection for Veg Box People, as this kind of box scheme, and people loved that, because it was like people would pop in and have a cup of tea or have something else while they were picking up their veg bag. And now it's almost in reverse. So when everything had to sort of stop for Manchester Veg People, Veg Box People grew in popularity over the last year. As Claire was saying, there was so much interest in local food, and it was a way for kind of restaurants to carry on, like they could have a veg box collection point, and also once we reopen again, we can go back to all the restaurants that have carried on being collection points throughout the, have just opened just to have people collect their veg or whatever, and start saying, actually, would you like to start buying veg off us? And so it's just a really, and what it also meant was that the growers had someone else to sell to when they couldn't be selling to the restaurants. They could carry on selling to the veg bag. So that's a important part of it. And then just the last thing really is what's the future. So we kind of, what I'm working a lot on at the moment is buying compared to the farm scale you were talking about, Will, it's tiny, but it's a larger scale for us. It's a 120 acre farm where we're going to do, basically it's about trying to extend what we can grow in the northwest. It's about trying to show that we can show and research what's the most ecological way of producing more veg and fruit, so agroforestry, and it's also about like when we sort of started off, it was kind of about us growing a market for the farm, and now those markets, both Veg Box People and the restaurants and the university before this year, were kind of crying out for us to grow more stuff. So it's kind of, again, and they're all really excited about being able to come to the farm and kind of supporting the farm and converting more land into organic. So I think, again, it's adding to that story, and it's something that people can be part of creating together. So I think that's all I'm gonna say. I've probably missed loads.
Great, Helen. I guess we can, open it up to questions, and maybe other things will come up as you do that. Now, as there's only a small group of you, and I know that some of you have put things in the chat now, so if I just sort of read out your name, and if you want to sort of unmute yourself, video yourself, whatever, and ask your question direct rather than me asking it for you. And also, can I ask if you well, actually, everyone who's sort of joined this call, if you'd also just like to introduce yourself to start with, just because we've got such a small group, so that, because there may be things that Helen wants to say that would be sort of particularly tailored to your interests or your, where you're coming from on this. So if you could just do a quick intro and then ask your question, that would be brilliant. So in no particular order, the first question that came through was from Dominique. So Dominique, would you like to just go ahead with your question on distribution costs?
Sure. Let me just go back to the question. Sorry. I'm Dominique. I'm the founder of Trident Supply. So we're focused on supply chain efficiency and sustainability. We're also organising the conference, if you haven't gathered that already. My question was around distribution for food. It's something I've really noticed is that food has so much complexity in terms of its distribution, because it can't necessarily be stored for very long. and it might need different storage conditions depending on what type of food it is. And it might need cold chain, and it's just it's not like distribution of books or something. It's got added complexities, and I think so often that aspect of things is really underappreciated when it comes to food. I've noticed that in the wholesale side of things, distribution cost is so often just incorporated in the price of the product. And offered as a kind of free service that's just part of what that supplier does. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on creating greater transparency around what actually is the distribution cost part of what you're paying for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. It's nice to meet you, by the way. Hello.
Yes, very nice to meet you too, Helen.
So I'm not sure when you joined. When I was talking about the model earlier, I was saying that one of the things that we felt was really important was that we basically said to the growers, you set your price. That is how much it costs you to produce, which is easier said than done, actually. But is the kind of aim, and the aim to support them to do that, and then we'll work out how much it costs us to distribute and that on top. And I think coming from exactly the same place that you're saying is that we'd come across various models where actually the distributor would say to the farmer, this is how much they would say, this is how much we're going to pay you for it, and the farmer would end up paying for the distribution cost, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
So we very much try and do that the other way around, and we have especially in the early days, managed veg people would often be going back to farms saying, you need to put your prices up, that's crazily cheap, but just because they were so used to being given rubbish prices for things. And I think so. As I was saying, we've kind of this year it's sort of all stopped a bit, it's ground to a halt a little bit, but it's starting to, restaurants are starting to get back in touch with us. But at the time, and I did write down what the pricing, they would set the pricing as the growers, and then we would do a 1.7% markup, I think it is, to cover the cost of production, to cover the cost of distribution, sorry. And we're talking a lot about how to come back, because it's almost like a little bit of a new start for us, I think, post lockdown. And we're talking about, we used to always talk about, we need to do a minimum delivery fee, because and we really do need to do it, because often it would just be like some restaurants, maybe not out of a bad thing, but just the way it was, would just want some salad, a kilo of salad or whatever, and it's just like, we really can't deliver a kilo of salad to you, we just can't justify it. And to share the distribution costs a little bit more fairly. So and what we do is put that 1.7 on, but give a discount for members. So because you can buy as a non-member and you can buy as a member.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like I absolutely agree in terms of the sort of transparency bit of it. And also the other thing that I didn't mention was we share a lot of resources between Manchester Veg People and Veg Box People. So we share the same unit, and but also share vans and some delivery. So because we have the collection points at some of the restaurants, we can then drop off and at the same time drop off for the collection point. So there's kind of helps with the distribution costs. But yeah, it's an issue, and I suppose for me it's a real issue about not putting that weight on the growers either. And it's tricky because the cost then works its way along the supply chain, but that's why it's kind of Is your question or not?
It does, yeah. I mean, it ties in quite interestingly with some of what we were discussing in the session before around transparency. That was in connection with sustainability, but I do think that the lack of transparency in the supply chain has actually kind of almost meant people don't understand it, and they don't appreciate everything that goes into it. And I think there was another point that was made in the public sector session yesterday around how the dynamic procurement process is designed to try and make the farmers feel or the producers feel like the customers as well, because so often that it's almost as if they're kind of treated a little bit like servants. We need this now, give it to us. And that's not always possible when you're working with, you know, the fluctuations of nature, and you know, it just doesn't work like that. So yeah. Anyway, I'll stop there because I know there are other questions.
Oh, I wish I could have come to all your sessions. The sessions sound amazing. Next year I'll come to them.
Jade, I don't know how much time you've got. Do you think have you got time to listen to the answer to your question, or is it too late?
There we go. What time is it? I've got to go in 5 minutes.
Okay. Oh, Helen can answer your question in 5 minutes.
Go on, what's the question?
I haven't got a question. Well, I don't know. It's not exactly a question. It was just, I said I was interested in how restaurants and farmers as well can start to address food poverty. It's not exactly a question to you. It's a question to the whole catering sector, really.
I think it's a really interesting point, and I suppose what I would say is we don't yet know the answer, but it is one of the things that in terms of the whole theme of the talk, in a way, of the food web thing, is about saying we need to do that by working together there needs to be lots of different elements, because actually otherwise it can become a bit of a food waste thing. So for example, our veg bag scheme, when people don't pick up their veg bags, they get donated to a food cycle or whatever. But like, that's not an answer. That's a great thing to do with our leftover food bags, but that's not dealing with. And actually, the thing we need to deal with is poverty, not food poverty, and that's a much deeper thing, and that's about system change, which I know then takes it into a whole different thing about changing the capitalist system, my favourite thing to come back to. But it's just like, how do we do that? We're working in a system that is creating social injustice on both sides of the food supply chain, actually, because growers also aren't earning enough money to cover their cost of living. So I suppose the thing that I would say is our model was absolutely created because of that, but not MVP, but the model as a whole of MVP, Kindling Farm, Kindling Trust, Veg Box People, the food, you know, the social prescribing, the working with schools, was very much about saying it doesn't work as it is. So how do we come together to try and solve that? And yeah, that doesn't mean that's not an answer in the slightest. But I suppose it's like
the answer.
It's like the only way we can do it is by working together. The only way that we can change the system the mess of the system that we're in, is by coming together. And actually, we've seen at Woodbank Food Hub, where we do the growing and the social prescribing and the chefs come out there to kind of work with us. We've seen people just be totally like, you know, people who feel they can't afford to eat organic food, being like totally gutted by the thought that growers don't get paid properly, and just those connections starting to happen, and people learning to cook with different produce, and come and garden with us and whatever. So yeah, that's a rambling long answer, and it's a long old journey, I suppose.
It's a great answer. I guess what we need to say to everybody involved in food is that environment's your responsibility, community's your responsibility, food poverty is your responsibility, poverty is your responsibility. That you can't say it's the farmer's job to deal with environment and the caterer's job to deal with cooking. That doesn't work. Everyone involved has to think about their responsibility for all of the issues.
And I think we also have to say to people that don't think they're involved in food, this is
Is there anybody who doesn't?
We all have to leave, and the government, you know, this has to be dealt with properly. Like, it shouldn't be that people can't afford to eat and that farmers can't afford to farm. It should be that everybody has the right to eat good food, and we have the responsibility to make sure that we farm in a responsible way, supported by the government and everyone else.
I don't think food poverty is caused by the food industry either. You know, it's a massive problem that it is. I think Henry Dimbleby made this point at one of the Oxford Real Farming Conference speeches, or maybe the Oxford Farming Conference. I forget which, but it was a really good point that, you know, we have to create food in the right way. That's one problem. But then we have another problem, which is dealing with poverty, and that obviously links into food poverty. But I think almost calling it food poverty makes it seem like it's a problem that the food industry has created, and that's and therefore it's, you know, down to them to solve. And I think that's yeah, very unfair actually.
Yeah, I think there are things the food industry can do about it. Not there's an immediate there's a sticking plaster response that anyone can do in what you do with your waste or whatever, but also the food industry can do more about addressing the underlying issues, thinking about access to employment, or how you progress up, or how access to training and so on. There's you know, all of us can do something about that. Of course the government should be doing more than they are, but in the meantime, yeah,
no, I think
in the hands of it.
I totally, because I think when we're talking about big industry, I think yeah, like the big food industry, I think you're right. And I think the 0-hour contracts, like for us, it's not just about farmers, it's about like people working in shops and restaurants and whatever that are having an awful time, and there's no security of employment. It's not food poverty, it's poverty. For me, that's the issue. And it's like, how do you create security for people so they can afford to eat as well as everything else? Like, it's, yeah, so it's just a much deeper, it's a deeper issue, isn't it? Anyway, we could rant on about it for
I've got to go. Nice to see you, Helen.
Yeah, lovely to see you.
Bye.
Right, okay. Joy, I don't know whether you want to just throw in there your thoughts about talking about food citizenship rather than consumers, which I think, you know, absolutely is I guess, you know, coming from a sort of local food background, you know, that's exactly how most of the sort of people that I work with look at it, very much so. And it sort of picks up on what Helen was saying about, you know, this is all about relationships, really, all of this work. So yes, but I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about that.
No, I think what Helen is doing, they're sort of doing that, as you say, they're bringing everybody into it. But it was interesting, in one of the slides there was still the word consumers.
Yeah, do you know, it's really funny, I almost changed that. I didn't do those slides, and I almost changed it because I never use that word ever. I really hate it as a word, and it's interesting, the food citizen word, because I always struggle with what to say, and that's why I didn't change it this morning, because I always talk about like the producers and the people eating our food. Yeah. Which is all of us, actually, because even as a food producer, I also eat my own, you know, I eat food. So
exactly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm glad that you brought that up, because what I meant to do when that slide came up was say I just really hate that word and I never use it.
Sorry for spotting it.
No, it's good. No, I'm glad, because I'd have forgotten it and everyone would have gone away going, she uses that word.
But then I suppose somebody like Will, presumably you use the word consumers because you are a business that is selling to consumers.
Absolutely. I don't think you can avoid it when you're in a retail sphere, because you're essentially, unfortunately, even though we've got all the same beautiful basics as Helen does, you know, we've got the market garden, we're employing locally, we are, you know, recycling everything that we can back into the soil. But at the end of the day, when you move it into a farm shop scenario, you've still got to ensure that it's sold, and you've got the ugly consumer chain there as well. But there's always those opportunities for throwing in the education piece. So, you know, making every interaction, every transaction a chance to tell people a bit more about where the food came from. And at the same, and you know, we touched on food poverty as well. I also hate that term. But it's the same thing. You know, what do you do with the stuff that you can't sell to consumers? It then gets passed on to people who really need it, and it's almost a really backward system. And I think that's a lot of the time why it stays a food industry issue, is because we're the ones who are actually more often than not trying to solve the problem backwards by using our surplus food to try and treat it. And that's why I think that action is increasingly not being taken. So that, oh, well, the food industry is supporting the people who don't have access to good nutritional food because they're giving them all the surplus. You know, and it just seems completely bizarre that that's the way that we choose to operate. So I think it's just it comes back to that citizenship question that you asked, Joy, and it's about that relationship with food and everybody's relationship with food. You know, food poverty, that's one thing. Nutritional poverty is the biggest issue. You know, you can still buy food. Most people still are able to buy food, but it's not it's not healthy, nutritious food, and most people have lost sight of what it means to produce food. I mean, it would just be a dream if every single person had at some point in their life grown some form of plant on their balcony that produces something for them to eat. And I don't think that we have anywhere near enough education about what food is, where it comes from, what it takes to do it. And it links back into your question, Tony, about distribution costs. In an ideal world, in my ideal world, it would be you get to the shelf in a supermarket. I mean, I would love to not go into a supermarket, and then on the ticket, rather than just how much you're going to pay at the till, it sort of breaks it down and says, right, this is how much the food itself cost, this is how much the labour was, this is how much distribution was, this is how much the plastic bottle that it is sat in costs. And it's a whole separate conversation that I'm sure we could talk for hours about in terms of how people understand value of resources and everything that goes into things.
And also just like for the growers working that out, like when I was saying about work out the cost of production, like it's really huge. Like it's not just a formula, it's like a mammoth different spreadsheets and years of trying to work it out. It's because there's so many different elements to it. But I think also, did you, Will, when you were in Manchester, did you ever go into Unicorn Grocers?
I don't know. I've slept since then. I don't think I would remember the details.
Well, when you come back
up,
and visit, they do really nice. I mean, not the breaking down, lots of stuff around. I mean, you probably do this anyway, but like there's almost the story of their growers a bit. So there's pictures of the growers. There's, there's just some really interesting ways to do that, I think, and I'm sure you do that already. But yeah, come for some inspiration.
Definitely will do. I'll come and find you at some stage.
Yeah, definitely. Come for a chat.